it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker. Jeff Neiman serves as Medowit's CEO and leads a top-notch team of healthcare revenue cycle professionals to maximize performance and accelerate growth for hospitals, health systems, and provider groups.
Thanks, Leanne. So I'll just reiterate, the first half of my career, I was actually on the provider side of the revenue cycle, running large revenue cycles for HCA and tenant hospitals. I've spent the second half of my career here on the vendor side, but grew up mostly in the self-pay world and that side of the business. So I've got an entire career essentially of experience there. I do have a fondness for Wisconsin. My brief stint outside of the revenue cycle when I went over to the dark side on the insurance side of the business was spent up in Green Bay. So I enjoyed summer times, I'll say, in Green Bay and up in Door County. Maybe not the winter time so much, but certainly the summer times. So with that, we'll launch in here. What I kind of wanted to cover today is just what's the current landscape around patient engagement? What are some of the challenges that are out there? What are strategies for effective patient financial engagement? Different solutions that we're experiencing and seeing in the marketplace and seeing our customers roll out at the current moment, and then a brief real world case study about how the right engagement, timely, effective engagement can drive financial performance improvement and outcomes as well. As Leanne said, if you have questions as we go along, if you want to enter them in the web chat, Leanne will stop me. I can't see that because I've got the screen up in front of me here, but she'll stop and ask questions as we go through or hold them to the end, and happy to engage and answer questions at the end. So just setting the table and the landscape here, I think all of us have seen and experienced over the last few years the shift to patients becoming responsible for more and more of the bill with high deductible plans, with higher copays and deductibles, all those kind of things. Patients are bearing a bigger burden financially and really are starting to become more active consumers and more active shoppers of healthcare. So their experience with you will be very important as to determining their next decision of, do they come back? Do they go somewhere else next time? The way that you engage with them really does matter. So just a few statistics here. 81% of patients report anger or frustration related to medical bills. I mean, that is a overwhelming majority of patients, right? Very few people are saying, nah, medical bills are easy to figure out and pay. Most people are confused by them. And to the extent that they're confused, they don't pay at the end of the day. That is cited as the biggest reason for why patients don't pay their bills or don't pay them timely. It's not because they can't afford to pay them. It's because they don't understand them and they're not going to pay what they don't understand. There is also direct correlation between understanding their financial responsibility and bills and how they score hospitals, health systems, physician practices on patient satisfaction surveys. So as those satisfaction survey scores become more important and may even impact your Medicare payments, it is important for you to engage in a way that helps patients understand what they're paying, understands their bills, makes it easy for them to communicate with you about those and so forth. Again, an overwhelming majority here. 2 out of 3 Americans say that they would struggle to fund a $1,000 medical emergency. So that's pretty much anything outside of a very simple ER visit. In fact, a complex ER visit's going to potentially be over $1,000 out of pocket for many patients today. So, any sort of visit, not necessarily a doctor's office visit, but any sort of visit to a hospital for a service is going to be pretty significantly stressful for patients. 15% of the population of the United States, right? Almost 43 million people, 15% of our population has a medical bill in collections today. Obviously, they either didn't understand it, they're struggling to pay it, a combination of all those things make it challenging. And then I don't know if you've seen this statistic, but I think we're all aware of kind of the magnitude. The estimated revenue value of a patient to a hospital is $1.8 million. So we're going to spend over the course of our entire lifetime between our out of pocket and the insurance dollar spent $1.8 million on medical care. That's pretty huge, right? So the potential of capturing that revenue and keeping it over the life of a patient creates a big difference to a hospital and the services that they're able to provide, and the ongoing growth of your health system or your hospital. But again, if you don't engage effectively with patients, they're not going to keep coming back. A few other statistics on the changing landscape here. I think these are fascinating because they're contradictory in some ways. 86% of consumers want to make all of their healthcare payments in one place. I'd like to go out to a single website and take care of all of my healthcare on that single website. Pretty interesting that people say that. Again, it's an overwhelming number, 86%, right? 90% of providers are leveraging paper and manual processes for collections. This isn't surprising. I mean, I'd be surprised if people weren't sending paper bills to patients, right? I think that's kind of the standard there, but nonetheless, that kind of says that's what we're relying on today as providers as our go-to solution is manual processes and letters. 77% of providers say that it takes more than a month to collect a payment. Not a surprise there, right? Our patients don't tend to pay us quickly. It's not their top priority bill to get paid. It's not like we can shut off their services or their cell phones going away if they don't pay or something of that nature. 71% of consumers are confused by EOBs. So as we all know, if you've got insurance, you're probably trying to figure out what should you pay, what is your insurance company telling you you're supposed to pay. And again, an overwhelming number of people, 71%, are confused by what their insurance company is saying. Here's the conundrum on this last one. 72% of consumers want e-statements or electronic statements for their health plan premium bills, yet 42% don't have a way to receive e-statements. So more people saying, I want to engage digitally. Now that's health plan, not necessarily hospital or physician, but just an interesting statistic that I threw in there. People are saying, bill me electronically. And yet half of the people saying bill me electronically aren't sure that they can even get electronic bills or pay them electronically. So again, there's some consumer confusion in here, in addition to just the overall landscape of trouble understanding and paying bills, right? That's just kind of the table stakes of what all of us are dealing with every day when we try to get consumers to engage and pay and understand. As far as the consumer experience goes, though, things are moving very rapidly. Technology is changing rapidly. Over the last 5-10 years, the number of ways you could pay, the number of ways you could engage around communications have grown exponentially. We're certainly seeing a movement where consumers are saying, not only do I want to pay online, but I want to be able to pay on my cell phone. And in fact, there's all kinds of people who have cell phones that don't have laptops, that don't have desktop PCs, but can engage with you on a cell phone or a tablet, right? There's as well new ways to pay. Apple Pay, Google Pay, things that didn't even exist 5 years ago, where a consumer can tap into those to pay. And the question becomes, do you as a provider have an ability to accept payment from all those different alternative payment sources? Obviously, that brings to bear just the importance of technology-driven communication. So I'm going to talk next about what technology is out there, what kind of capabilities exist, what should you potentially be thinking about engaging in if you're not using it already today, and what really does consumer behavior look like when it comes to these different engagements. Think about it, we're really pushing maximizing the ability for a patient to engage with you, right? Don't offer them just one or two things. Different patients have different preferences. Different generations have different preferences, right? Gen X, millennials, baby boomers, they all have very, very different preferences when it comes to communication, and being able to offer different types of or channels of communication pathways is critical if you want to maximize your ability to communicate with all of those groups. So all of these are different things, right? Paper statements, payment portals, having an online payment portal is critical. Being able to still take paper checks is important. That's not going away anytime soon. Your Medicare population is still primarily getting paper bills and paying with paper checks. So you can't just ignore that and jump all in on a digital communication platform. Resources are limited, right? So answering the phone is important, but you've got to have the ability to use IVR to really let patients self-service to the extent that you can, and really only answer the more difficult, complex questions with staff in your business office or in a call center environment and so forth. Starting to create chat capability is important. So if you're going to put a payment portal out there, younger generations want to be able to jump on and chat and talk about a question that they have on their bill. They don't want to necessarily pick up the phone and try to find your phone number somewhere on the website. Being able to accept payment plans and manage those payment plans and having some technology around that becomes important. SMS and texting back and forth with patients becomes important, and as well e-statements, right? So there's all kinds of different preferences. There's all kinds of potential communication channels that we could be engaging in, and quite candidly should be thinking about using all these if you're not. Again, best practice solutions. So you hear a lot of kind of digital only pushes these days, right? If you're not doing all this digital communication, if you don't have a website, if you don't have texting, if you aren't doing things digitally that are available 24/7, you're missing the boat. Certainly true, but you can't go all in on digital and ignore the traditional methods of collecting, right? You still have to have letters for people that prefer letters. You still have to have people answering the phone for folks who want to talk, as opposed to texting or using some other methodology. And so the best solution is a combination of all these. Don't abandon the old to jump in with the new, but continue to build out capabilities one at a time to add to traditional methods of communication as you move forward. Users by behavior. So when we look at kind of just different users today, about 45% of people prefer to engage via self-service, online, IVR, via mobile application. They want to take care of themselves. They really don't want to talk to somebody. They would prefer not to speak to a human being. But 55% of people still prefer live talk. They want to pick up the phone, call into a call center, and talk to somebody. I mean, I can tell you, for example, my parents are never going to log online to pay a bill. If they're confused about something, they're picking up the phone to call. And so considering healthcare and that our customer base is probably skewed slightly older in age than many other businesses, live talk and letters and things like that, snail mail, are not going away anytime soon. Statements, therefore, are still important. So how do you, though, set up statements to make sure that you're engaging all of your different generations and ages and things of that nature? Well, first of all, the basics. You've got to have your logo and brand on here. Kind of the third thing here, financial assistance. Most of us have some sort of financial assistance law, rule, regulation that we've got to comply with, and need to have that on the bill. Charges, the fourth and fifth spot down here. I've seen some different approaches to this, but you want to have enough information so that the person can understand it, and so that the amount they owe lines up with what their insurance carrier is telling them on the EOB that they owe, but probably not so much information on here that it creates confusion and more questions and generates calls into a call center, if you can avoid that, right? That's kind of the challenge and the right balance that you're trying to drive there. How do you then engage digitally via an old school letter? That comes to kind of the top right here on this particular letter, numbers 2 and 6 here. Making sure that you're very clearly identifying how a patient can communicate with you. What are all the different methods, right? Should they call you? If so, what are your calling hours? Can they email? Can they log online? Can they chat, right? What are all the different methodologies? Put those out there so that they're easy to see, so that a consumer can pick their preference and communicate with you that way. We're starting to see some really cool interactive capabilities, and I'll share an example of that later. Where if you put a QR code on a statement, somebody can scan a QR code, and via that, they can link directly to your website. They can maybe even go download an app that's a app tied to your hospital or your health system or your practice online and engage with you on the app. But a lot of really compelling, interesting things you can do in this day and age with the QR code on a letter. One of the things you can do, particularly around applications, is, and we're seeing this. I'll do a quick plug that we've created a patient concierge app, which is essentially kind of a 3D cartoon character that can interact with the patient, speak to them on their phone, right? But along with that, you can create apps that have things like geofencing capabilities. If somebody downloads that app to their phone, you can actually track when they cross a physical barrier. So you can geofence your facility, including your parking lot, for example, if you wanted to. And when a patient crosses that barrier, that geofence, you can send them a text on their phone that says, hey, appreciate you showing up to the hospital today. I see you have a scheduled service. Go to the 6th floor and look for pediatrics or neurology or whatever they're there for, right? But you can interact with them without even someone human-wise knowing that they're in the hospital, but the system can figure out that their phone has crossed a barrier and they're now inside the four walls of the hospital or on the grounds of the facility or whatever the answer is, right? Again, when they leave, you can track that and send them another text message to thank them for coming today, send them a survey, all those kind of things. But a lot of really great ways to engage a patient digitally with zero human intervention at all. It's really just the technology and engaging with the patient, unless there's a problem and you want to give the patient an ability to speak to a person or chat with a person or something when you send those text messages to them. Again, technology utilization by demographics. So this is just a study that we did with that type of technology, with a patient concierge type technology, advanced, pre-service type of texting back and forth. And if you add all these up, they add up to 100. So we were just tracking of the 100% of people who did engage with that technology, what age group did they fall into? Were they male or female? As you see from this chart, females are actually more likely than males to engage digitally. And you get close to no engagement digitally once you pass age 55. People just are not going to download a new app onto their phone when they're over 55. They're not going to really respond to a text message, even if you send them a text message. But folks under 55 are very comfortable, as you see here, particularly in that kind of sweet spot, 25 to 44 age category, are very comfortable engaging digitally. And I would caution that as we get into that lower age group, 18 to 24, at least from the way my kids behave, I'm pretty sure they're very comfortable engaging digitally as well. I think we just don't see as many patients in that age range, or if we do, they're coming in with parents and things like that and aren't the guarantor. And so maybe we're not engaging with them at all. We're sending the text to somebody who's a little bit older, a mother or father, for example. Things to consider if you're going to kind of communicate digitally. A couple of cautions here. You really need to have the right patient consent language in your condition of admission. So you can't or shouldn't just be texting everybody unless they've told you it's okay for you to engage with them via text and utilizing their cell phone. There's actually federal laws in place, like the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, or TCPA for short, that's out there that says that you can't call or contact a patient on their cell phone without them telling you it's okay and giving you that number as their primary contact number. So you might be able to imply that if they wrote down that phone number on a document, that's how they wanted to communicate with you. But it's better for you to actually have language in that condition of admissions that they sign off on that says it's okay for you to text them, to email them, to communicate with them in a variety of ways. We're starting to see some providers go so far as to say, we are going to email you your statements. If you want to opt out of that and you want paper mail, you have to check a box here to get paper mail. So that's pretty interesting, pretty far. We're seeing more providers say, do you prefer text or mail? Check which one you want, and being able to track that then in the host patient accounting system, or the EMR. But it is important for you to get permission if you're going to roll out mass texting and things of that nature. If you're going to do some of the other more advanced things I talked about, obviously you have to have QR code technology. You have to have a print vendor who can create QR codes that are going to interface with your technology. You really have to know how to do that. You may have to have an app that you develop and put out online on the App Store, but certainly all kinds of things to consider there. And then the other thing people underestimate in a big way when they think about digital communication with patients is they think, oh, we're not going to have to answer phone calls anymore. You might be surprised to learn that digitally engaging with your patients sometimes creates more phone calls, not less. So if you weren't communicating with your patients, for example, pre-service at all, and now you're starting to send out reminder texts for services or a text to patients saying, you're going to have a copay due at time of service. Here's what it is, or just please bring your credit card with you or a form of payment, whatever it is you're going to text them. If you're just starting to do that and you haven't done it before, assume that a percentage of the people getting those texts, again, back to kind of generational differences and things, are not going to respond back via text or aren't just going to show up with their credit card at the next day or 2 days later when they come to service. They're going to get the text and they're going to literally turn around and call you that minute. So you've got to be prepared from a staffing perspective and things to handle those inbound calls. Just a couple of examples here of things, right? A text to a client payment portal. This is an example where you can send a text out to a patient providing a link for them to go in and see what's going on. This could be a collection text for somebody after the fact. Hey, you owe a $100 copay or whatever, but ultimately you want to put in a link for them to go out somewhere. This is an example of somebody who the link takes them out to MyChart. So they're just logging into MyChart on Epic. Obviously, this could be any platform or any payment portal you wanted to take them to. They could click on billing. And the thing with texting is you can certainly text people. I'm not going to say text 24/7, but the website is up and available 24/7, right? So you could text somebody at 3 p.m. and they can see it but not respond to it because they're busy working, turn around and get home, eat dinner, 8 o'clock at night, say, oh yeah, I got this text, click on it and go out to your website and engage that way, right? So again, it has the potential of cutting down on call volume. I'm not going to say it works every time, but it certainly over time, if you reach the right consumers with those texts, certainly can be very effective. And that's also where it becomes important to know which consumers to text versus which consumers not to text, and thinking about segmenting your patient population and using effective forms of communication. Talked about, again, here's just another collection letter outlining the ability or the different methods of communication that somebody can have. This one includes a QR code at the top right. Somebody's just going to put their phone over the top of that, scan the QR code, and again, that can take them directly out to a payment portal or a website that you then can control the communication with. Lots of ability, obviously, then to do that. You can tailor your communication. It's important, though, to make sure that, again, your communications are compliant with Fair Debt Collection Practices Act rules and regulations and those kind of things. So if you're not familiar or up to speed with those, make sure you're engaging legal counsel that's experienced in those areas to help with that. If you have vendors that you're using to do collections, I think it's important for you to really be looking for vendors who have capabilities to use all these advanced kind of communication channels and aren't just sticking to old school letters and phone calls, but are really looking to engage your patients the same way that you want to engage with them. And again, the things that the payment portal offers is obviously 24/7 access, multiple payment options. You don't want a patient to then go out to a portal and only be able to pay in full, and that's their only option. If you're doing that, again, you're just generating unnecessarily phone calls into your call center. So you should be designing interactive websites that have the ability to really accept all different kinds of payment plans and things that are within your guidelines, so that anything a representative could do in a call center type environment, the website can mimic and do as well. Another new technology that's out there that we've found to be very effective is what's called drop voicemail messages. So in the day and age of caller ID and cell phones, right? It's a rare call that comes through that you don't know who's calling you. And I am the king of forward to voicemail, as I'm sure many people are, right? If you don't know who's calling, I'm not answering it. And even if I know who's calling, if I'm not sure that it's going to be a 2 to 3 minute call, I may just forward them to voicemail anyway, right? So really what you're trying to drive is a consumer behavior as much as anything with phone calls these days. So what I want is the consumer to do something. I want them to know I'm calling them about a bill and to remember, oh yeah, I got that letter in the mail last week. I need to go pay that, right? It's not so much that I want them to call me back. It's that I want them to do something behavior wise, or I'm sending a reminder text, hey, you have a service in 2 days, respond back a C to confirm, right? I want them to do something simple. So another tool in your arsenal potentially is drop voicemail messages. What those are is the phone never rings. It just drops a voicemail directly into the person's phone and they get a notification that, hey, you have a new voicemail message, right? So they don't even have the option to forward you to voicemail. You don't have to have a live person on the other end to speak with them, but you can deliver a message that's pre-recorded. That's exactly what you want to tell them to get them to do the behavior you want to do, right? So whether it's a reminder of their service, instead of sending a text, I want to send something um, more personal. I want to send a voice message reminding them of their service, welcoming to the hospital, telling them where to go, whatever the custom thing is. You create a pre-recorded message and you can blast that out, right? You can then figure out how to be smart enough to segment that by service line, right? If there's different directions you want to give or an address you want to give based on the type of service or the provider, you could build that into 10 pre-recorded messages and manage those individually based on the system capabilities that you have around scheduling. If it's bill payment, you might just want to call and say, hey, we wanted to let you know that your insurance company has adjudicated your claim, leaving you at the copay and deductible. Please log on to our website at www.ourhospital.com and take a look at what you owe to make plans to pay, right? Any of those things can be done. But again, instead of just getting forwarded to voicemail, you can just drop the voicemail and let somebody listen to it at their own convenience. Another tool that's out there, particularly for your call centers, if you're not using it, is speech analytics. If you are answering calls and talking to patients, I think this is becoming an artificial intelligence tool that's critical for a couple reasons. One is it helps you understand what your staff are telling patients, right? So it helps you do quality assurance on your staff, and it helps you hear and understand what patients are telling you as well. So I'll go back kind of old school when I started my career. I know we tried to listen to 10 calls per employee per month, and we used that to determine if the quality of their work was good or not, and we would give them feedback. That is a very old school methodology if you're still using that. With today's speech analytics, AI can listen to 100% of the phone calls, and it can flag concerning accounts, concerning language, concerning phrases. It can send 10 calls from today to a supervisor's desktop to say, hey, there was language in these 10 calls I didn't like or didn't want to hear. Take a listen to these. There may be coaching opportunities for employees, or there may be a curse word that was used that is never want to hear this kind of word in a call, and I'm going to send that to the supervisor to listen to. Again, sometimes the technology may not be able to determine if it was a patient or an employee, speaking during that time, but still can outline and flag accounts for you. And again, listen to 100% of the calls, not just a statistically insignificant sample of calls as we've done for years and years and years. So the QA component of it obviously is important. The other piece that's important is you can actually start to listen to patients and gauge what they're telling you. So one of the things I've always been frustrated with is kind of if you're relying on HCAP scores, there's, the one generic question about the billing process, and a patient, a sampling of patients get those, they respond to it, and you may be held feet to the fire for, hey, you're not getting good enough scores on the HCAP surveys. This is really an opportunity for you again to listen to 100% of the calls and hear what patients are telling you. And so, an example of this is in an environment where we used it. We uncovered a consistent trend of overpayments. The patients were complaining that they had overpaid and needed to get a refund. And when we looked at the data and compared it to other customers, this one very large health system had complaints from patients about refunds that were 3 times the rate of all the rest of our customers. And so we dug in, we identified mathematical errors essentially in their patient estimation tool where they were over collecting at point of service or pre-service from patients, and then having to issue refunds and creating dissatisfied, upset patients, particularly if the patient wasn't getting the refund within 24 or 48 hours of the time that they were calling and asking for it, and really helped eliminate that issue for that very large health system. It's something we would have never caught just listening to 10 calls per employee per month, or even asking our staff on the floor, what are the issues here? We wouldn't have heard that. But speech analytics was able to really highlight that issue and say, here's the number one thing people are calling about. And it's statistically different from other customers and what you're seeing across the rest of your company. Another thing you really should be considering, this isn't necessarily patient communication, but I think it has to do with the overall patient experience, certainly, is patient financing. Hospitals should not be banks. There are ways to engage with banks, and for patients who can't pay within a reasonable time frame, connect them with low cost loans. What we're seeing is a big shift of folks saying, hey, we'll take payment plans for up to 3 months, 4 months. But if somebody wants a 2-year payment plan, we're not going to continue to finance that. We're not going to provide the opportunity for somebody to stretch out payments over 2 years, for example. That said, a bank who's charging low interest, it doesn't have to be crazy interest, but you can find banks that'll charge 8, 10, 12% interest rates, something much lower than a typical credit card, are happy to set up those payments and manage them. For them, that's good business. So finding ways to partner with banks that do that, not forcing 100% of your patients into a loan program, but the ones who really need it, making it available for them is critical. A couple of cautions that I'll throw out there is you want to partner with a bank who will then in turn take HSA dollars to accept payments. So I experienced a situation with a provider recently that I went to that they wanted to force me into this kind of payment plan and sign up for a new card and things like that. And I said, well, I'm willing to sign up for the card, but can I then take my HSA and pay my monthly payment on that other card with my HSA? And the answer was no. Well, that kind of defeats the whole purpose, right? That's why I have an HSA, is to pay my medical bills over time. I was appreciative of the fact that I could spread my payments out, but if I couldn't pay them with HSA dollars, it really didn't, in my mind, help me. It wasn't helping me maximize, the tax avoidance with the HSA dollars that I was trying to achieve, and so forth. So it's a small thing that some of the banks may not talk to you about, but it's an important thing, I think, to make sure that you drive patient satisfaction, right? Make sure if you engage in one of these that you're getting paid up front, and that the bank is taking on the burden of the loan. Not to say that there's no recourse. A lot of these have recourse. But again, the bank shouldn't be holding back payment from you. I've seen a lot of cases where you're getting paid 80 cents on the dollar up front, and there's still recourse associated with it. Unless you're offering no interest loans, you shouldn't be footing any sort of upfront cost. You should be getting paid 100% upfront. And then if a patient defaults, of course, you may have to recourse money, but don't sign up for agreements where you're taking a haircut and never getting that money back, regardless of whether or not the patient pays. But again, offering this type of ability for patients to spread out their payments as long as they want, candidly. If they want to pay $5 a month, as long as they're willing to pay the interest on it, that's on them then, and not your health system or your hospital or practice to carry the burden of that. And then, kind of finally, analytics and reporting, right? So all this is important, but as you start to move into more digital communications, as you start to offer patient financing, if you're doing some of these things for the first time, you want to be able to certainly measure what you're doing and understand the consumer behavior, understand the progress. And you may be surprised, good and bad. One of the things when we first started texting, we measured everything. And our discovery, candidly, was that people were just as likely to respond to a text and do the behavior we wanted them to do as they were a phone call. Now, that's not the case across every age of the population necessarily, but in aggregate, texting was just as effective as phone calls. What we found, though, is it's more effective with the younger population under 55, and phone calls were more effective with the older population above 55. So now we focus, for example, on texting under 55 first before we make phone calls, and the inverse on the over 55 population. But again, measuring those things, having the analytics, and really being thoughtful and being able to learn from what you're doing and pivot quickly to different solutions, maybe experimenting with a few things even at the outset for the first 6 months or so, can be really helpful to your understanding and to patient engagement as well. So I'll wrap up with just a case study here, and then we have plenty of time for Q&A. So happy to do that as well. So in this particular case study, it was a 5-hospital nonprofit health system. And they were just sending out billing statements every 30 days blindly, right? So sometimes they were sending billing statements showing a full balance because the insurance at day 30 still hadn't adjudicated. So that they're sending out, here's the balance that's due, not necessarily telling the patient they needed to pay, but just sending statements, if you will, right? Again, we don't advocate for that. We think that's a mistake. If you're just sending statements every 30 days, it doesn't make sense. You're wasting a lot of money on letters. You need to be much more targeted in your patient engagement. So when we engaged with this particular customer, we changed to send very targeted statements only when a patient owed a particular amount. We deployed all the things I just talked about. Texting patients, having chat available, setting up a dynamic website that could negotiate monthly payments online without a patient even having to talk to a human being, right? They could just go set up their own payment plan online, offering connections and links into patient financing. All those different kinds of things were made available to patients. And in this particular case, what we saw is a boost of about 500,000 per month in collections. So again, overall, this is not immaterial. They saw a pickup of patient cash of $6 million a month across $6 million a year rather, across a 5-hospital system. So a little over $1 million a year in uptick here. And really, these solutions at the end of the day didn't cost this health system any more than they were already spending to send traditional letters and answer phone calls. So really quickly, I'll make my plug for Meduit and then wrap up, and we can go to questions if there are any. We are, a technology-enabled services company. We're the 3rd largest revenue cycle servicing company in the U.S. You see here quickly on this map, the orange states are where we have existing offices. The push pins are just kind of representative, if you will, of our customer base today. We're headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina, but operate and have customers in 47 of the 50 states around the U.S. We certainly think a huge differentiator is that we are not owned by a health system. Most of the big RCM companies that have the size and scale that we have are owned by a publicly traded health system or a large nonprofit health system, and they're out trying to sell their services. Sounds great, but at the end of the day, their big customer makes up 50-80% of their revenue. And as long as you want to do business the way their parent company does business, that's great and is going to work fantastically for you. If you want customized solutions, that's probably not going to work so well, right? We are totally independent. we have very large customers, but no one customer makes up more than 5% of our company's revenue. And so, we have had to build customized solutions all along the spectrum of what I just described for a variety of customers. So that's a quick overview of MediWit. Just want to thank everybody for listening to the presentation. Thanks for your time today, and happy to answer any questions.
While folks are thinking of their questions, I do have a couple that came through. First one, Jeff, is can you talk a little bit more about converting patients to digital payment solutions and the difference it makes to have a live person via chat or phone for certain groups of people?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you engage in digital communications, it is something that takes time, right? Your adoption rate isn't going to be instantaneous, but really being thoughtful about pushing out text and talking to somebody who's knowledgeable about it. I just talked through some lessons learned from our perspective. We would probably focus on texting the younger population first, but having different workflows for different age groups or even different types of service. Like an example, if you've got somebody with a high deductible plan and they were in the hospital 10 days and they owe $10,000, a text probably isn't going to be a real effective way to get them to go out and pay their $10,000 bill, right? A phone call and a heartfelt discussion with them about how can we help you, and those kind of things are going to make a big difference. So I think it's don't have huge expectations. Start into this slowly, maybe experiment with some groups where just conceptually it makes sense, or you've talked to some other experts in the industry and they've told you to start here. But gaining some traction and having some success stories, I think, will help you convince your leadership teams that this makes sense and help you effectively roll this out and so forth. Again, don't abandon. I've heard some people out there say, oh, just set up this website and you won't need call center staff anymore. You won't have to take any patient calls because patients are just going to self-service, right? I'll remind you back to the slide I posted up that 50% of patients don't want to self-service, or over 50% of them don't want to, right? They still want to call and talk to somebody. So having a human being available for them to speak to explain their bill and help it make sense to them is critical. And even the thing I didn't mention is in the 45% of people who prefer to engage digitally, and one of the studies we did, about 40% of them didn't complete a transaction online. So they went out online, but they didn't go all the way through paying their account or setting up a payment plan or whatever. They stopped at some point for some reason, and it could be as simple as, wait, my EOB over here isn't matching up with what the amount is out on this website. I'm not going to pay. So again, then having for them the ability to quickly click over and chat with somebody, or have your phone number prominently displayed there so that they can call if they need to, is going to help you maximize your engagement and your collections and returns both.
Great, thank you. Here's another one. If my hospital needs to prioritize digital patient tools due to budget constraints, what would you say are some of the most important ones to leverage?
I'll talk about two things. First, and I think the most important, is having a patient portal or payment website, right? So whether you have that through your EMR, I know Epic and MyChart certainly have a very robust patient portal, but having that is really critical. I think just having it set up and having it be flexible, right? It's not just a pay all or nothing type of a website, is really important. That's the most important thing, because so many people are used to paying their bills online. If you don't have that as an option, hopefully most people do by now, but if you don't have that as an option, you're really missing the boat. The other thing that I think is really effective is texting. People are becoming more and more comfortable with texting. It's becoming a preferred communication method for the younger generation. They would rather you text them than call them. You're never going to speak to them, but if you text them, you'll get a response in 10 seconds. It's just, that's part of the way that the world's turning with folks who are very comfortable with texting. We've seen a lot of success with texting, and I think that's something if you haven't started doing it. And quite candidly, most of the organizations that I talk to today are not texting, and if they are, it's only appointment reminders. It's not around anything in the patient financial services process. It's not really anything with billing or collections. There is a huge opportunity for you to reduce expense and engage with patients who might not otherwise engage with you at all through texting.
Great, thank you. And I can attest to the responding text but not calling from a teenage son perspective. Here's another question. You mentioned that many of the new digital vendors do not provide a call center to address patients who need personal assistance from a live person. What are some of your suggestions for identifying the right vendor that does offer call center assistance?
Yeah, I think you kind of said it. It's important to have everything grouped together. We have seen a couple of vendors out there that say, we'll take over your lettering process, we'll letter and text your patients, and we're going to provide them this online portal. I mentioned that in my talk. And we've actually seen some health systems buy off on that. They've gone all in with these vendors, and lo and behold, 50% of their patients are still calling. And they don't have anybody to answer the phones because they fired their other vendor who used to actually send old school letters and answer the phone call, and went in with this kind of, forgive the term, this sexy new high-tech digital vendor that pitched them that everybody was just going to self-service. And the reality is everybody doesn't self-service. So, the question kind of answered itself from the standpoint of if you're outsourcing your self-pay processes, you should be only working with vendors who can provide both that digital component and the call center solution, as well as a combined package. You don't want to do one or the other. And candidly, even if you're engaging somebody just to add digital, if they're not talking with your call center and communicating with them on a regular basis, you don't want them off sending texts in your call center not even knowing the patients are getting texts, for example. We've seen that happen literally. And patients calling in saying, you just texted me, and your call center saying, what? We don't text people. So the communication is really critical. And sometimes you'll get somebody in IT who runs down a path of engaging this vendor, and it's just not thought out and fully integrated with the operation that you're running in revenue cycle. And it's critical to have all that integrated.
Okay, thank you. You shared, in relation to the case study, you shared that one hospital system added 500,000 in collections per month, or 6 million a year, by utilizing patient engagement tools. Is that really a realistic figure that our hospitals could hope to achieve?
It certainly was realistic in that case. I've seen this happen quite a bit before, where whether it's new cash or accelerated cash, I guess that's a question, right? It may not be new dollars in the door for this particular system. It was new dollars in the door because they were just doing a poor job of overall engaging with patients and collecting. We've seen other people who do a pretty good job of engaging. Like they offer all of the digital capability, they offer inbound calls, for example, but they're not really doing any outreach to patients who aren't paying. Right? They're not sending text messages. They're not doing voicemail drops. They're not doing outbound calling. They just kind of said, okay, we built a portal and we're here to answer inbound calls. If that's all you're doing, I would dare say that at least at a minimum, there's opportunity for you to accelerate cash. You're giving a bad debt collection agency probably some easy wins if you're not doing outreach in a meaningful way in your in-house or your early out vendor billing processes. And so there's huge opportunity for you to, at a minimum, even if that, let's say $500,000 a month, well, or let's say $100,000 a month per hospital isn't net new cash. If it's accelerated cash, you're doing it at a much lower rate than what your bad debt contingency rate is. And so there's still cost savings opportunity there for you.
But again, thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you all for attending today. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thanks, Leanne, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks, Jeff.